welcome to another video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any videos. Also, if you're really interested in the Krays, try our private Facebook group, Krays Crime Lords of London, where we have over 1,000 other videos and thousands of images. It's free, we're not monetized, and the link is in the YouTube description section. But keep it quiet, just between me and you, okay?
Welcome back. We continue the story of my time with the Krays. They were crazy days. My name is Albert Donoghue. I was chief growler and rent collector for Ronnie and Reggie right up to 1968 and their arrest. Looking back, I'm amazed I stuck it out so long with the firm. I must have been mad in those days. I just seemed to get involved. It was a stupid way of carrying on. But a lot of the attraction of being on the firm and a leading player in it was the fear and respect that other people showed me, the glamour of being with the top team in town. On the other hand, if I had never got involved with the twins, I could have had a good life running my own painting and decorating business. Even after I'd joined them, I could have quit and gone forward with the advance cab company. Other people had eased themselves away from Ronnie and Reggie in the past and were still walking around. Instead, I stuck with them and endured the other side of the firm, the sheer tedium. A lot of it was just sitting in pubs and clubs, trying to keep awake. Right from 9 o'clock in the morning, you were at the twins' beck and call. Okay, some weeks you could see nothing much was coming up, so you might say to them, "You don't need me till Thursday. I'll take the kids to the zoo." But Fridays I always had to be on duty to do the collections and the payouts, so I had to wait till these employees came in for their wages. I'd tell them, "I'll be at the Dragon tonight," or "I'll be round the beggars or the widows," or at one of half a dozen other places. If you had to give them money, they'd always show up. But when? Or it might be around 5 in the afternoon and you're thinking, "Thank God, everything's done. I can have a quiet night home," until the other two would say, "See you around the Grave Maurice tonight. We've got a couple of people coming round." Then something unexpected might occur and there'd be a bit of a scurry. Someone might have been arrested, or the twins had realized someone they'd hurt had complained to the police. Then I'd have to get on the phone and call the solicitor down, and we'd be running round in circles all night till we sorted out the problem. This kind of life didn't do much for my marriage, especially when my wife had our third child, our younger son, after I joined the firm. Inevitably, she and I would argue about what little she knew of my work, especially the hours I kept. Even so, considering the hours my stepfather worked at the foundry, my wife probably saw more of me than my mother did of him, provided I stayed out of jail, which I was more likely to achieve with the Krays than without them. So I just went about my business. My wife never said, "You'd better come away from the twins," or "I'm leaving." Nothing like that. It never got to that stage. It's partly the East End upbringing. That's the way women thought in those days. You went along with whatever the husband was doing. Women would more or less put up with anything the man was doing. My wife only came out with the firm once, and she didn't like the experience. I took her to the Society Club in Jermyn Street where we had a party. Barney Ross was there that night, and it was great to see this scruffy little pug-nosed ex-fighter, drug addict and alcoholic, playing all that Beethoven stuff on the piano. People loved it, but later on, the missus said she didn't like the crowd. She wouldn't come out again, except occasionally to pubs to meet a couple of the boys and their wives. She ruled out attending a full-blown firm meet with all the hangers-on, in-laws and outlaws. She didn't want that. She was a straight girl from a straight family, and she just wasn't into that scene. She met Ronnie and Reggie, but she didn't trust them. She never got over the fact that it was Reggie who had shot me. Then there was all that business with the flowers and Ackerman knocking at the house. She was worried about how I was going to take it. Would I go round their house and start shooting? Until I told her, it's calmed down now, forget about it. Life on the firm never calmed down. It just got crazier and crazier. I hardly ever took my work home. I think a couple of times people had been to my place and been patched up if they'd had a cut, but I never laid stuff on her, I never got her involved. She wouldn't have it, but she knew I was at it. She knew I was a hooligan, but I think people turn a little blind, as long as they don't know the details. There were other issues between us. It's been said that I was the womanizer of the firm. It's true I met a couple of ladies, but I was a young man, still only 29 when I joined. So if I didn't look at a lady, what was I going to look at? It was better than meeting boys. I was never a saint. You meet a girl and she looks at you and you look at her, and you ain't going to live like a monk, are you? You go, yeah, okay. I can't see anything wrong in that, apart from the unfaithful bit. Some women were attracted by the air of power and danger surrounding the firm. There were other fringe benefits. You could always get tailor-made clothes half price. You might take your own material to the tailor, but he was still well pleased because he could say he was making suits for the firm. Sharp, well made, always on view wherever you were on parade. People would see these expensive whistles, and the tailor could trade off that. But if he fell out of favour, and you felt like a change of style, there was always someone else happy to get the work. Women, clothes and money. Some compensation for what was a highly stressful and nerve-wracking occupation. We worked hard and played hard. Anywhere in London, it was impossible ever to drop your guard and completely relax. My only fuse box was Tuesday. Unless there was something special on, Tuesday was always a slack day. I'd got over all the weekend's business, and next weekend's was a long way off. So every Tuesday I'd go and get drunk at the Regency, where I had my own little corner. I used to stand there and everybody stayed out of my reach because they knew I was getting drunk. I'd have a good night, relax, and probably talk to one of the waitresses. But early Wednesday morning I was back on duty, sober and ready to face whatever lunatic tasks the other two might throw at me. Sober or drunk, I wasn't someone to tangle with, even though I was rarely armed. I only carried a gun on special assignments, and I didn't carry a knife, because at any time you could be stopped and searched by the police. I could never see why you would carry a tool unless you were going on a mission where you were likely to use it. So if ever I found a knife on someone, I would use it on him. Indeed, on the firm I made a point of it. We would grab these people, dip them, get hold of their knife and slice them with their own weapon. Once I found out that a Birmingham guy, who was a casual friend of ours, was plotting behind our backs against the interests of the firm. Then I was told he always carried a knife and where he kept it. A few days later, he was with Ronnie Hart and me in a pub. When he went to the toilet, we waited for 15 seconds, then followed him in. As he was coming away from the sluice, we started talking to him. Then Ronnie grabbed him. I took his knife out and stuck it in his arse. It was a classic gangland move. We did it to teach him a lesson. Later the twins approved, they told his bosses, and when he staggered back to their territory, they gave him another belting. The underworld is a different world with its own codes, and you work within those codes. When someone gets out of line, it's normal to give them a slash. Most people in the overworld would say, "Oh, disgusting, call the police." We'd just go, he was out of order. He was getting trappy, pack him off for some stitches, send him home. No one would call an ambulance. The most we'd do is call a cab. In the East End, the underworld and the overworld perpetually intertwined. We villains operated almost with impunity. breaking the law every hour of the day. Yet most of us had homes where our wives and kids, or mums and dads, lived straight and law-abiding lives. Wondering how much Ronnie and Reggie's parents connived in their criminal activities, or if they knew what an evil pair of brats they had reared was like trying to solve the riddle of the Sphinx. If you were on the firm, you couldn't help getting to know the twins, Mum and Dad, Violet and Charlie, because the morning meets used to be held in the family home, 178 Valence Road in Bethnal Green, otherwise known as Fort Valence. It was a tiny rented terraced house, and there's no point in going on a tourist trip to see it nowadays because it's long been demolished. There were 3 rooms on the ground floor. The front room was used as the main office. That's where you said or did your bit before you were sent off, not necessarily out of the house, but usually to one of the other rooms where it would be tea and biscuits served all day, and you would do any other business that didn't need the twins being present. If you had said to Violet Kray what's going on, she would have replied, with all honesty, "Well, my boys have got a crowd of friends in, and they're sitting in the front room talking what they're talking about nobody knows." Half the time, we didn't know, so I'm sure she knew nothing in any detail. She made sure she didn't know, but she probably had a good idea. In the Krays 1990 movie, Violet was portrayed as a very formidable woman with a ferocious tongue. I must say I was never on the wrong end of her tongue, but then I was never with her when anybody ran her boys down. All that stuff took place when the twins were growing up, and neighbours were reporting them to the police for any mischief. Then she might have ripped into any interfering busybodies. But I've never known an occasion when she did it in the 1960s. By then, if somebody was mouthing off about the twins and running them down, she wouldn't have had to lift a finger. One of us would have gone and sorted it. After that, there wouldn't be a peep out of the offender. Of course, she must have known the twins were at it in pretty spectacular ways. The record shows they were tearaways right from the start, but thinking of my own start in life, that didn't make you an exception among East End kids, and it didn't make you socially unacceptable. On the contrary, in many households it was a passport to social acceptability. Your antisocial behaviour made you a welcome guest. This was the world turned upside down, so it took a lot of East Enders a long time to realise that the twins weren't just extremely successful tearaways, but dangerous psychopaths masquerading as traditional thugs. Their dad, old Charlie Kray, certainly knew there was a lot of heavy stuff going on. If somebody on the firm was involved in any violence, he was an expert in getting bloodstains out of clothes. You could just hand a suit or a coat to him, and he would clean it up by the next morning. There'd be no forensics left. But as long as he didn't ask and nobody spelt it out to him, he could claim he knew nothing. It's like the Germans didn't know about concentration camps. Okay. You believe it if you like. Don't believe it if you don't like. It was easy to underestimate both twins because they were educationally subnormal in the extreme. They couldn't read and they couldn't write beyond a normal 6-year-old's ability. You know the kind of joke, I read a book once, it was a green one. In the case of the twins, that was literally true because they'd once been given a book, How Green Was My Valley, and for some reason they'd both been forced to read it. So whenever anyone mentioned a book, in our circles I admit this wasn't very often, that was the only one the twins could come up with. When people are bending over backwards to say nice things about the twins, they say, "Ah, but they never gambled." That's true. But that was only because they couldn't understand betting odds. They could not count or calculate. Yes, they could count money like a fairground gypsy can, but no basic education had sunk into them at all. One time, Reggie went to see Doc Blasker, the firm's tame GP, about a bit of an infection. He came back and asked us what was on the prescription. We read out to him urethritis, except of course that when we Cockney spoke, it came out as euthritis. So Reggie said, "Is that anything to do with youths?" Mechanically too, the twins were a complete catastrophe. Reggie was a terrible driver. He had a license, and now and again if they bought a nice new car, he would want to drive it. Until he hit something, and he usually did. Then we'd have to get one of the boys to drive it. Ronnie didn't drive at all. They were completely helpless, without someone else to prop them up. They had just 3 things going for them: considerable physical strength, a ruthless capacity to direct it, and instinctive animal cunning. Oh, and they had one other thing: each other. They were like 2 hunting dogs. If there'd been only one, you could have whacked it out with no trouble. But the 2 of them together could come at you in any way at any time. A lethal combination. I don't think Violet Kray created the twins. It wasn't her fault that they turned out like they did. I often wonder how they evolved, what turned them into what they were. Ronnie once told me that he had a cousin 2 or 3 years older than they were. When they were 7 or so, this kid used to take them onto the bomb sites, which, after the Blitz, made marvellous play areas for children all over the East End. Boys, in particular, would make little dens and camps among the rubble. So this older cousin would get the twins into one of his dens and torture them. Well, in the middle of one of these deserted sites, you could scream, shout, and cry for hours, and no one would hear you or come to your rescue. Did this torture have any effect on the twins? Well, I suppose it must have done. They never told their parents about it. But obviously, it had to be stuck deep in Ronnie's memory for him to tell me about it. I don't know what happened to the cousin later on. Probably something drastic. But I'm sure it wasn't Mrs. Kray who made these boys villains. It was just the way you grew up in them days. If you were a little bit handy with the fists, you got into the fight game, and from there you could go into protection or robbery. If you weren't any good at fighting, you'd go to work in a factory or on a building site. Anything, just to get your bread and butter. But the twins had something else in their makeup. They weren't just desperados. They were mad. I can't claim to know how Ronnie Kray came to be queer either, but he certainly was queer throughout the time I knew him. He didn't hide the fact that he was a homosexual. He liked the young boys, young men, not children, and they were known as his prospects. There were a lot of scouts who used to go out hunting for good-looking, susceptible youths. They would come back and say, "Ronnie, I've got a terrific boy you've got to meet," and then this kid would be brought to the pub. Some of these kids would be fit young fighters, and I used to think, Christ, how can that lad get involved in this sort of stuff? But they did. It surprised me. Ronnie wasn't the only gangster I knew who preferred men to women. There's half a dozen villains I can name who were queer, and they weren't shy about letting anybody know about it. Even in the 60s, this wasn't anything unusual. It was just something you didn't mention. If this guy likes tying women up, then that's his business. If this one likes them wearing black stockings, that's his business. You don't ask these silly questions, it's none of your business. So some guy likes a young man, and that guy likes a granny. It's just how they get it on. Nothing to do with me, as long as they don't start tampering with my trousers. There was a thing within the firm. Supposing Ronnie might fancy a showbiz star, male of course, he used to put out what they called a W for warrant. Anybody who can service the warrant by getting that star back to meet Ronnie would get some sort of cash reward. There were other W's. One was put out later on the detective Nipper Reed. Nipper wasn't gay, of course, but by that time he was hot on the trail of the Krays. When he heard about the W, he took it seriously enough to take steps to protect himself. But mostly, the W's were for pretty young men in the entertainment fraternity. We were all up the West End one night in this well-known Chinese place, the Oasis restaurant, a perfectly straight establishment, and we saw this guy sitting on his own. He was sitting there with shades on at a deserted table. Ronnie spotted him and said, "Who's that then?" And somebody said, "That's Cliff Richard, an up-and-coming singing star." "Woo," said Ronnie, "I'd like to meet him. If you can get him for me, there's a tenner in it for you." So straight away, there's a W out on him. If anyone can get him into a meet, that's all he's got to do. Can't guarantee that he'd fancy Ronnie's company. God, Cliff's not even gay. But that's what the W was, to bring him in. It certainly wasn't to kill him, like the one for Nipper Reed. It was so Ronnie could have his evil way. Now obviously, Mr. Richard never had anything to do with Ronnie Kray. Nobody ever got hold of him to serve the W. It would have been bad if it ever had happened. Lots of straight people have suffered damaging publicity just for appearing in one photo with the Colonel. I mean, old Cliff. I don't particularly like his singing, but he don't seem a bad guy, and I would have hated to see him involved with that sort of person. Most of Ronnie's successful W's involve less elevated folk, but with Ronnie, where there was sodomy, sadism wasn't far behind. Years before I joined the firm, they had the club in the Bow Road called the Double R, that's R for Reggie and R for Ronnie. One of the barmen there was gay. Barry was his Christian name. For some reason, this guy topped himself, hanged himself. We heard it was a lover's quarrel or something. So the twins dug around and found out that Barry had been involved with a Greek guy. So they captured this guy, and they kept him locked up in a cupboard in the Regal Billiard Hall in Mile End for 3 days. No clothes, nothing. And they just used to whack him now and again, and put a hose over him and throw bits of bread at him and stuff like that. And then they just let him go. They didn't kill him. Even so, none of this could have been much fun for him. I dare say his tormentors got a weird kick out of it, which is probably what the torture was all about, because whether this Greek had really had any responsibility for Barry's death, or if he was just a boyfriend, I don't know, and I'm sure the twins didn't either. That brings this edition to an end, boys and girls. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there soon.
Leave a like and subscribe.